Thank you so much for watching. This is a presentation on questioning and discussion based on the Danielson rubric 3B. Please feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions at all. So in this presentation, there's 4 sections. The expectations of questioning and discussion, what the rubric says, different protocols that can be used, some resources, different content areas. Differentiation, how you can use these different protocols to differentiate for students with IEPs, Ls, or students who just might be struggling in your classes. And lastly, teacher voices, so how teachers are implementing these things specifically in my building. So firstly, the rubric states that questioning and discussion, the way they're evaluating it, is looking for questions of a high quality that students can think about, reflect on to deepen their understanding, using discussion techniques that ask students to explain and justify reasoning, and using a range of techniques that encourage students' participation. Some of the indicators are questions of a high cognitive value asked by both the teacher and the student, questions that have multiple right answers, or ask students to consider multiple approaches when there's a single answer, effective use of student responses and ideas, discussion without the teacher in a central role, focusing on the reasoning exhibited by students in a discussion, and high levels of student participation. So in a highly effective classroom, what this looks like is students initiating the higher order questions, students extending the discussion, the teacher using the student responses to deepen the understanding, and students inviting comments from their classmates. Basically, all of the students are highly engaged in the discussion. In an effective classroom, the teachers are using open-ended questions with multiple answers. The teacher's making effective use of wait time. Discussion allows students to talk to one another without the teacher as the mediator. The teacher calls on many students, even ones who might not be raising their hand. Many students are engaging in the discussion. The teacher asks the students to elaborate on responses. The one thing that you should notice is the big difference between highly effective and effective is in a highly effective rating in a highly effective classroom, the students are really driving the discussion. In an effective situation, it's the teacher still being facilitator and pushing the lesson and the questioning and the discussion forward. But in a highly effective classroom, the students are doing a lot of the generating questions. They're the ones who might be calling on one another, challenging each other's thinking. In a developing situation, questions are being asked with a single correct answer. Few students are responding. The teacher might call on several students, but few of them are actually participating. The teacher's asking students to explain, but only a few actually do. So what does this look like in classes? So developing questioning and discussion in classrooms might look like a teacher asking, what's 6 times 7? What year did the Civil War begin? How many ounces of water are in the beaker? The rubric credits these as really low-level questions with only one answer, and it's not generating any discussion. Also asking questions to which the answer is already on the board, in the student activity guide, somewhere on the student's paper. If it's just a question that's easily retrievable, recall from somewhere, it's considered developing. You can always start with those questions and then build up. So to move this developing situation to effective, the teacher could start with low-level questions to get kids involved and interested, but then follow up with higher-level questions. So this can generate the discussion, inviting other students to build on the responses of others. So what might this look like? For example, you can begin with, what year did the Civil War begin? A student responds, 1861. Great. Now, what are some of the causes that led to the beginning of the Civil War? This is a question that obviously has much more responses. It's many different things that students can discuss. So if a student responds slavery as one of the causes for the Civil War, then the teacher can follow up with, can anyone elaborate on why slavery was a main cause of the war? So again, the teacher is still driving the discussion to move it into effective, but gathering students' responses, thoughts, ideas, building, using student responses to move forward with the lesson. So this is a really easy way to take a developing situation with low-level questions and move them into higher level questions, generate more discussion, elicit more responses from students, and move into the affective domain. Another example, in a lesson about photosynthesis, the teacher does a turn and talk, asking students to discuss why plants perform photosynthesis in the mini lesson. The teacher gives them about 1 minute to talk. Students mostly stay quiet. Some say it's how they make energy or it makes oxygen. The teacher doesn't correct misunderstandings and moves on with the lesson. The class doesn't debrief the turn and talk. This would be considered developing because, again, the question is considered low level. There may be many responses here, but the teacher's not really giving them a lot of wait time. Most of the students aren't engaging. To make this turn and talk effective, the teacher needs to get more kids talking. Turn and talk is a great strategy, but kids might struggle with what to say. 1 minute is not enough for some students to process an answer. The teacher also needs to address misunderstandings or misinterpretations of the question. So the teacher should budget more time. More time for the discussion will get more kids talking. The teacher can also use the protocol with the turn and talk. 3-2-1 is a very easy and quick way to generate more discussion. Students can write down 3 things you learned, 2 things you already knew, 1 question you still have. This will help generate more to talk about. When the teacher hears a misunderstanding, they should stop and address it by correcting it. They can say, I'm hearing a lot of you say that plants perform photosynthesis to make oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct of it, but the purpose of photosynthesis is for plants to make energy. These tweaks will make this effective. To move an effective lesson to highly effective can be really difficult. An effective lesson looks like, in a geometry lesson on congruence, the teacher assigns different proofs to each student in a group. After they solve their proofs, the students are asked to explain their proofs to the group, and the group is asked to check their teammates' work. Each student presents their problem and shares how they solved it. The teacher circulates to listen to discussions. She finds one student who didn't know how to solve their proof. She asks the group, does anyone want to suggest how this can be solved? Another student shows the group how they would approach the proof using side angle side. The students agree that this is correct. The teacher asks, is there any other way this could be solved? The students discuss and agree that only side angle side works in this proof. One student asks, is this triangle isosceles? Another student says yes, because it has 2 equal sides and angles. So this is effective because students are sharing with one another very purposefully. Everyone's engaged in the discussion. It's an important part of the learning. The teacher supporting and facilitating the discussion, asking students to collaborate when they see someone is stuck and deepen their understanding of the topic. Students are asking questions of one another and responding. To really view this particular lesson as highly effective, the students would have to be actively engaged in creating the questions, responding to one another in a more thoughtful way. If the teacher, again, still has to facilitate the discussion moving forward, it's considered effective, which is really what we're looking for the most part. Highly effective is challenging. This is a great example of highly effective, but this is not easy to do. A lot of kids will struggle with this, especially students who are in elementary, middle, lower levels of high school. They're going to have a very hard time getting to this level of discourse with one another. I've really only seen this highly effective level of discourse amongst juniors and seniors. So in an English lesson on argument, students are engaging in a Socratic seminar on the impact of video games on teens. All students come to the class prepared, having read several articles on the topic and having generated questions the previous class. The teacher has prepared students for the discussion and shared the protocol. Students have a note catcher to jot down thoughts, questions, and responses. The teacher begins by sharing a quote about the dangers of gaming and how it can cause violence in children. Students all begin jotting down ideas. Virtually all hands go up to begin the discussion. A student responds stating, I disagree with this quote. I've been a gamer for years and I'm not a violent person. Another student responds, I don't agree with you. You've never been so frustrated at losing a game that you threw your phone or controller. Games can definitely make us violent. The class nods and agrees in unison. The student responds, okay, I see your point. But gaming can be positive, and esports is $1 billion industry. Jay, don't you have a gaming channel on YouTube? What do you think? Is gaming making kids violent? Jay agrees and says, gaming has kept me out of trouble and I have lots of followers online. I've made connections through my gaming. I'm pursuing game design in college. Think of how many kids are gamers. Do you see all of them being violent? What about movies or music? Can't we blame those things? The teacher then asks, so if we argue that games don't promote violence, is there another way in which gaming can be harmful? So there's a lot going on here. And again, it's so hard to get to this point. There's obviously a lot of preparation that's been done ahead of time to get students able to engage at this level. So it has all the elements of effective discussion. Virtually all the students are involved in the discussion. Students are initiating higher order questions to one another, which is a huge component of highly effective. Students are extending and enriching the discussion. So they're elaborating on each other's thoughts. They're calling out one another, asking questions of each other, inviting other students to respond. Students are obviously very highly prepared for this. They have a lot of information. Everybody wants to participate. There's natural discourse, and the teacher doesn't really need to do a lot to facilitate. So the best way to get to effective or highly effective questioning and discussion is to provide protocols, to give students very specific, meaningful protocols that are built into the lesson. Questioning and discussion has to be planned for. So here are some ready-made materials. The first is some depth of knowledge question stems. So giving students stems where they can, and this comes from Actively Learn, which is a great resource, giving them stems at different levels. So trying to stay away from just all level 1 questions, beginning with level 1 questions, but then building up to 2, 3, and 4. Getting more complex. Not every student might be able to engage at that complexity level, but definitely it's helpful to give them the stems and for you to create at different levels. I like to start with a level 1 question where every student can engage and then work my way up to a level 4. There's more stems linked here as well. Here's a link to discussion techniques. This comes from Cult of Pedagogy. This is a list of class discussion techniques where, again, there are so many different options you can try. Some will work well for your students. Some have a lot of structure. Some have a lot of preparation necessary. What I like about this article is that they go from higher prep discussion strategies like doing a gallery walk to things that are much more low prep. So something like a Socratic seminar may take a few days to build up to the actual lesson. But something like concentric circles, which I love, speed dating, is pretty easy. So a fishbowl, pretty low prep. This is an article that's linked to differentiated options. So here at Minds in Bloom, they put some ideas down for differentiated options for students who may struggle. Things that are pretty simple, like giving them prior notice. Sometimes providing the questions up ahead for students or providing them a summary of the text. Of course, giving extra time, wait time, is something that I think most of us as educators struggle with. We have 40-something minutes in a classroom. We need to move ahead. So trying to build in very thoughtfully in your planning that extra time for learners who may need a few more minutes to process the question can make a really big difference. Things like breaking it down, asking follow-up questions, or giving students specifically notations on the questions, things that they may want to consider. So this gives us a lot of different options if you want to check that out. These are organizers for discussion. So think, pair, share, 5-3-1, inside outside circles, Padlet, and the question formulation technique are all things that are pretty simple to implement in any lesson, in any content area, at any grade level. So these are very specifically organizers, though, to build into your lesson. Sometimes having students just engage in a think, pair, share can be difficult. They need to actually maybe write it down before they engage. That's the real important part of the thinking. So taking a few minutes to allow students to stop, think, write before they pair and share. 531 is really similar to a think, pair, share. It's just allowing students to think and write before they engage. Inside outside circles is a lot like speed dating, having students organize themselves into concentric circles. Students have a question that they're asking each of their groups before they shift or move every 2 minutes. So they ask their question, they get a response from their partner, and then they move one seat to the right or left, and they continue to ask. So great way to generate discussion. Students are face to face. They kind of have to talk to each other. You get that one awkward moment where students are across from someone that they may not really like, but they tend to just ask their question and get their answer anyway. So this is nice. It's really active. The kids find it really fun. Padlet is a great way to have an online discussion. So this is a nice resource from Facing History. It shows how students can have a virtual discussion. You may have a class that's very quiet. They don't feel comfortable engaging with each other out loud. You may have students who are quarantining or students who are out or absent, and they can also engage with the class through this. So Padlet is a nice example. Students can also engage visually, which I think is really cute, really fun. They can connect to one another. So someone asked, what's a hero? Somebody connected Katniss, put a line to say, this is what a hero looks like. This is a great way to follow a discussion, to memorialize a discussion. So Padlet is another great resource. Facing History also has some wonderful resources for not just history teachers, but teachers who teach any subject area. They just have some good pedagogical resources. QFT is the question formulation technique, and this is a whole protocol for students asking their own questions. So this is something that you can do if you want students to generate questions on a topic. And it asks them to really think about their questions, to understand what they're learning from their questions. So this comes from the Right Question Institute, which you can find online. I sat down with my administrator after a lot of questions from staff, and the one thing that a lot of people wanted was a checklist. They wanted to know very clearly what are administrators looking for when they walk in. So that was my question to my AP. What are administrators looking for? So these are 6 things that admin pretty much is looking for when they're coming in to evaluate questioning and discussion. The first thing is open-ended questions. They're looking for questions that are asked throughout the class that are higher order. They're not just a right answer question. They're definitely engaging students to think, to have different responses, to look at things from multiple perspectives. The next thing they're looking for is explicit questioning and discussion strategies. Something has purposefully been built into the lesson. There's a strategy. The teacher is not just randomly saying, oh my God, I'm being observed, turn and talk, which sometimes we make desperate and do. But there is definitely thought put into the lesson for students to engage, to think, to discuss, to question throughout the lesson. It's not just an afterthought. It has purpose. A think, pair, share, a turn and talk, something as easy as that, all the way up to something difficult like a gallery walk or a Socratic seminar. There's an explicit strategy that's been planned for. The next thing is opportunities for student-to-student responses, that there's time that's been built into the planning that allows students to respond, to discuss. There's time. It's not just 30 seconds of turn and talk time, but there's multiple pieces or slivers of time built out through the lesson where students are meaningfully engaging with one another, either through group work or pair work. But time has been built in, and there's multiple opportunities for students to respond in groups, in whole class, in small groups, in pairs, whatever it might be. The next is the synthesis of student responses. So this is really a highly effective attribute. As my administrator explains it to me, this is where students are using pieces of their discussion to formulate into one response. So, for example, a group may be working together. Each of them are looking at something from a little bit of a different perspective. They're collaborating, they're synthesizing all of their thoughts into one response that then they're sharing out with a larger group. So, this is more of an attribute of a highly effective classroom. A classroom can absolutely be effective without the synthesis of student responses, but if you have this, this is a highly effective attribute, that kids are taking pieces of other students' responses and using that to generate one response from everyone. The next thing is multiple answers and perspectives. So questions that are allowing students to see multiple perspectives, the possibilities of a topic, a problem. This is something where students can look at something from multiple perspectives. In history, I feel like teachers do this often where they're looking at a historical event from multiple perspectives. Looking at, in science, looking at something like a scientific problem or a scientific hypothesis from multiple perspectives. In mathematics, we do this all the time as well. Looking at a problem, how can it be solved in different ways? So, and of course, in ELA, we do this all the time, looking at different topics from different character perspectives, looking at how we can approach something like an argument from different perspectives. So I think this also is an attribute that lends itself to culturally responsive teaching, looking at something from another's perspective. The last thing is purposeful planning. This kind of ties into the explicit strategies and the opportunities for student-to-student responses, but really seeing that the teacher has built-in discussion and questioning, not as an afterthought. They've planned for it. They are listening to the discussions for assessment. They're asking students to share strong and thoughtful answers. These answers are leading from the mini lesson to the activity, or the activity to the wrap-up. The discussion and the questioning is actually doing something in the lesson. It's not just there to be there, but it actually has a reason, a purpose. It moves the lesson from one point to the next. So, for example, if the activity is discussion, something's happening with that discussion. If the activity is happening as an assessment after the mini lesson, something is done with it. It's assessed. The teacher points things out. It doesn't just feel like it happened and then nothing was ever done with it. So, of course, one of the issues with questioning and discussion in so many of our classrooms is that not all of our students are on the same page. Not all of our students are learning at the same level. Not all of our students are comfortable engaging the way that we want them to or need them to. So we have to step in and differentiate for students who may struggle when it comes to questioning and discussion. So these are some ways to very easily differentiate for some pretty common questioning and discussion topics. So the first one, the turn and talk. A really easy way to differentiate is just giving students more time. Also providing them with sentence stems. For learners who may have a difficult time engaging, this helps them understand what they should be saying to one another. In a Socratic seminar, which takes a lot of time to prepare, Socratic seminars are based around texts. So in those days up to the Socratic seminar, using modified or leveled text for students gets them a way to engage, providing them supports. So preparing questions that are accessible at many different levels. Again, having to maybe begin with a picture, a quote, something that easily a lot of students can engage with, allowing students to become familiar with the questions ahead of time, allowing them to prepare. One of the reasons why students always say that they feel afraid to raise their hand and engage is they think they have the wrong answer, or they're not really sure what the question is asking of them, or they're not sure if their answer is what I'm looking for as the teacher. So giving students things ahead of time can make them feel a lot more confident. Think, pair, share. So very similar to turn and talk, giving students sentence stems can help them formulate responses and engage. Providing them with a graphic organizer can also help students focus their ideas. So using thoughtful grouping to engage students with a learning partner. I find this is helpful when you have students who may feel uncomfortable with language. For example, if I have a student who's an L and they're very not confident in their language abilities, if they feel kind of lost in a group of very strong students, pairing them with a student who may speak their native language can be helpful. They feel a little bit better. Even if they're using English to discuss, they may feel a little more confident and like they're not being judged. Same thing with students who have IEPs. You can do heterogeneous grouping or homogeneous grouping, but making sure that the student feels comfortable with the group that they're in may help them engage a little bit more. Providing students, again, with a graphic organizer. So here's an example of a think, pair, share graphic organizer. This can also help students when they have something tangible to write down. They can read from what they wrote. Again, wait time can be really helpful, and it's an easy differentiation. Instead of giving students just a minute or 30 seconds to come up with an answer, giving them a few minutes, it's really hard for us as teachers to endure that awkward silence. But if you wait, students will raise their hands. It takes time, but I found that even just waiting, eventually the hands start popping up. Students also don't want to endure that awkward silence, so they're much more likely to raise their hand and say, all right, I'll share. A silent debate is another thing that's easily differentiated. I find it really, it's really nice for students who may not want to speak out loud. So what's great to do here is to model expectations with the co-teacher to show the students what this looks like. So you can also use a Jamboard. This makes students comfortable with anonymity. If students just don't like speaking out loud to one another, them writing to each other might make them feel a little bit more confident. And the last is a gallery walk, providing varying levels of questions to interact with so that students have many possible answers. You can provide visual prompts for students who may struggle with language, allowing students to move at their own pace, modifying requirements to allow for extra time. So again, in a gallery walk, you may have 5 or 6 questions hung up around the room for students to respond to. Selecting maybe some lower level questions that students feel a little more confident with, and saying to students, hey, just go do number 1, 3, and 5. I don't expect you to get to all 6, or I don't expect you to do all of these. I just want you to do those 3. Modifying expectations can definitely help them out. I also found visual prompts are great for students who may have IEPs or Ls, providing them a picture to look at or something that doesn't have to do with language. It can help them feel a lot more confident and engage. So these are how some teachers are using questioning and discussion at my school. So this is a discussion protocol. I said, he said, she said, we agree, we disagree. This is an easy way for students to synthesize their thoughts during their discussion. Turn and talk. It's easy in a setting like the gym, where physical education can be a hard place for students to generate discussion, but turn and talk is a great one. No papers are necessary. Question formulation technique to get kids generating their own questions, which is definitely a highly effective attribute. Scaffolding discussion prompts when students are working in pairs is really helpful when you're trying to differentiate or work with students who are at varying levels. Using a quote or a picture to begin the lesson, providing them with something interesting to discuss. I think that first 5 or 10 minutes is so important to hook kids in, to get them interested in the topic. I use a protocol where I ask a student a question, they answer, and then turn and ask another student a question. We go around the room until everyone has answered and asked. So I love this idea, almost like a whip around, asking everybody to ask something and answer it. It gets everybody involved, and it's kind of fun. I like using sentence stems to support struggling learners. It helps them figure out what to say. It's a great differentiation technique. So these are just some additional resources, some things that I found very helpful. There's an ASCD article, Let's Switch Questioning Around. This is just a nice way to kind of think a little bit more about questioning and discussion. We Teach NYC. If you're a New York City teacher, you can log in and see this resource. It's reflection on questioning and discussion. So if you search this up, it is on the We Teach NYC page, and you'll have to log in to view it. CRSE is a great place to also get resources on students engaging with one another meaningfully. You can look up the culturally responsive and sustaining education framework for a lot of excellent resources. And the last thing is Facing History in Ourselves Resources Library. This is a course I actually took in high school when I was a student, but I've used it often. I'm an English teacher, but I use a lot of humanities and history resources. But Facing History has just some great teaching strategy resources here for anyone. Just some good pedagogical resources. So please let me know if you need anything. Feel free to email or reach out anytime. I really hope this was helpful. Thank you again for watching, and have a wonderful time teaching.